begin, inshallah, just talking about the Black American or Black positioning of Black people within Islam. You know, I think this topic is important because a lot of times people, they tend to believe that Islam is for the Arab people or even Pakistani people, not knowing the amount of individuals who even were around the Prophet, peace be upon him, the ethnicities and everything around the Prophet, peace be upon him. So we know some of the familiar figures in regards to Islam, one being Bilal ibn Rabah. And of course, Bilal ibn Rabah, he was a former slave, and he was given da'wah, or Abu Bakr as-Siddiq told him about Islam and made him aware of Allah or God, and also the mission of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And then from there, so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq talking to Bilal ibn Rabah, who during that particular time he was known for his voice, and he was also known for his ability, his interaction with the people in trade. So his master during that particular time, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, who worshipped idols, and Bilal ibn Rabah, he would look at the idols, and on some instances, one story they have of him where he saw one of the idols with a broken body part, I believe a broken nose, and he saw that the people had took some type of adhesive or some type of glue, and they stuck the nose to this particular idol. So he started, inspecting it, and he said, how can this idol, how can you be worshipped when your body part broke, and then somebody placed your body part on, when your nose broke, and then somebody placed your nose back on your face. So he began to internalize this reality of there being one God. So Bilal ibn Rabah, and we know his contribution was what? The adhan, of course, or the call to prayer. He was the first muezzin, and he was Abyssinian, and some people, they debate over what does it mean to be Abyssinian, whether it's restricted to the land in Ethiopia, or it covers far more, a larger span of land than that. But however, he was Abyssinian, so Bilal al-Habashi, and his contribution was the adhan. And when we say as-salatu khayru min an-nawm, in the adhan, the section where Bilal radiallahu anhu, he was able to contribute in the call to prayer that prayer is better than sleep. And some even, they talk about some of the other individuals who are around the Prophet, peace be upon him. Some debate over Sumayyah, who was the first woman martyred in Islam. Many say that she was a black woman. And then also there's a chapter in Quran named after a black man. Does anybody know about the chapter in Quran named after a black man? They say you should know this one. Luqman. Okay, so Luqman, some of the scholars even argue whether he was a prophet. So Luqman, peace be upon him, or alayhi salam, he was an individual who gave advice to his son. He was known for giving advice to his son. He's a black man. They argue over whether he's a prophet or not. He gave beautiful advice to his son in the Quran. So, and there's also an individual in the Battle of Badr, Mihjah, who they say was the first to pass away or die, or the first who was a martyr in the Battle of Badr, was this individual who was also a black man. And then also the companions, prominent companions, being related to black people. You had during the time, the Prophet, peace be upon him, being related to Hajar, who was the wife of Ibrahim, her being a black woman, and they call her the mother of the Arabs, who was a black woman who now, when we perform the pilgrimage to Mecca, we have to follow in her footsteps. So this is a black woman that, you know, definitely we as Muslims, when we perform the pilgrimage to Mecca, we have to follow in the footsteps of a black woman. So fast forwarding, you know, there's a lot more history, but you know, there's only a few people, so I'm just going to give just some of the main points. So we have, you know, when a lot of times people say we were once kings and queens, you know, what period are we talking about? So there's, you know, a known period from the empires, Sudanic empires. You have Ghana, Songhai, you have Mali. So Ghana being the first of these major empires. We should know about individuals, the Ghanaian kings. We have Mansa Musa, Askia the Great. The king during that particular time, he owned the gold, the large gold nugget. The king had control over the economy. And the people, they describe, Ibn Battuta, he was able to travel even to Mali and stay there for a year. He describes in his text how the people were very honorable. Many of the explorers, they describe the dogs of having gold collars, there being gold. This is what drove the economy, gold and also salt. They traded books. Mansa Musa is known for his famous pilgrimage in 1324. So he made a pilgrimage to Mecca with 60,000 men. So he was a known king. You know, his empire is perhaps the most talked about empire one of the most talked about empires in the history of Africa. So you had Mansa Musa, Timbuktu, Abu Bakr II, who they said just actually had individuals making a voyage over here to the west before Columbus. There's a famous book by Ibn Battuta, They Came Before Columbus, where references many of his studies. And then also before the Mayflower, it talks about you know, some of that history. So we have you know, Mansa Musa, Askia the Great, Ahmed Baba, who was known for his library. He had over 1,600 volumes of books. You know, so the children, imagine a land where the children, they would be reciting Quran, they would be studying, and their discourse wasn't, for example, who is the best rapper right now? Who's winning the battle, Drake or what's the guy name? Meek Mills. Yeah, Meek Mills. That wasn't their discourse. Their conversation was their scholars. They would argue over their scholarship. They would talk about astronomy. You know, the young boys, they would trade books with one another. We trade baseball cards, basketball cards. In my time, we did pogs and all that stuff. Y'all don't know nothing about pogs, huh? So imagine, imagine a time when the people, their discourse, their conversation was on a much deeper level. You know, they had Sankore Mosque. You know, next door was this university where they performed open-eye surgeries. So we need to know something about the Sudanic empires. So starting with Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. You know, so fast forwarding it to individuals being brought here to America. So the scholars go back and forth over how many individuals were actually from the Muslim faith, from the Islamic faith, who were brought over here as slaves. So there's some autobiographies that some of the slaves were able to write on the plantation, talking about their past as being Muslims and everything else. So just to be balanced, about 30% of the slaves were Muslims. Okay, so Muslims were known for revolting on the plantation because they couldn't accept that they were being a slave to another man. You know, they believed in being a slave only to God. So Greg Grandin, in his book, he has a book where he talks about the trio revolt. So that the Muslims, they revolted on what they thought aligned with their night of power during the month of Ramadan. So they revolted on the plantation. And also Bahia in Brazil, they had this particular revolt. So from slavery, Muslims were known for being able to resist on the plantation. They resisted with by keeping their African names, reciting Quran. You know, they were able to get Qurans on the plantation. Individuals like Ayyub ibn Sulaiman, he wrote the Quran from memory 3 times on the plantation. You had other individuals who they were able to pay off the debt to the bookseller. The bookseller would give them Qurans, and they would pay off that debt. It took them sometimes a year or 2 to pay off that debt, doing work on the plantation for the bookseller in order to get a Quran on the plantation. So there's you know, actual records of Qurans being on the plantation. So fast forward, we talk about the times when coming out of slavery. Now we're talking about Jim Crow and this search for black liberation. And Islam was a part of that conversation. You have individuals like W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington. You know, Booker T. Washington was known for he was more passive. You know, he didn't want to go out and protest. You know, but yet and still he said that you should do a lot of self-blaming. You should blame yourself. Stop blaming the white man. So Booker T. Washington, he was seen at the White House. He was able to visit the White House, and you know, he was criticized by W.E.B. Du Bois, who his spirit was more of a resistance and protest. You know, so both well educated. From that came Tuskegee Institute from Booker T. Washington, and then came the talented Tin with W.E.B. Du Bois. But Islam also had a table in that conversation with Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey had a Muslim teacher or mentor named Dusay Muhammad Ali, who had a journal during that particular time, and he influenced Marcus Garvey. So even in Marcus Garvey, his movement, the UNIA, United Negro Improvement Association, it was heavily influenced by a Muslim named Dusay Muhammad Ali. Then came the discourse with Edward Wilmot Blyden. So Edward Wilmot Blyden, he would argue with the people that Islam was better for black people than Christianity. And he influenced that type of thinking, saying that, you know, Christianity was for white people specifically, and a better model of you know, citizenship in America for black people was Islam. So Edward Wilmot Blyden, in his text, he argues this. From his text came movements like the Noble Drew Ali. This was the first Islamic movement or Islamic influence movement in America. Noble Drew Ali, who, you know, his debates or arguments were towards nationality, was towards diet, dress. So the black man during that particular time, and like today too, there was a search for autonomy, there was a search for masculinity. So you had, America didn't readily give access to black men to gain manhood and masculinity. So Islam had some aspects of masculinity for black people, okay? So, and I want to ask and get you all involved before I end. What aspects of masculinity did Islam have for black men during that particular time? Because it wasn't offered by society. Society during that particular time, especially when we're talking about coming out of Jim Crow, the black man had to wear a mask. Okay, so the black man didn't have a space to really express their true feelings, their true sentiments. Okay, so Islam offered some type of masculinity for the black man. So what aspects of manhood did Islam offer? That's my question.
Jobs and self-reliance and